David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, I need to talk to you about something really important today, and I need some time to lay this all out for you, but hopefully it'll be productive. Yesterday, I started getting emails and seeing comments saying, David, will you disclose your funding, and will you disclose whether you're getting money from a pro-Bashar al-Assad group that is in existence to prop up the Syrian regime? Disclose your funding and tell us who your funders are. And it seemed like a weird thing to ask of me. I didn't understand, why are people coming to me and saying, am I getting funding from a pro-Bashar al-Assad group? So I started researching this, and then I saw a couple of reports and posts that there are several left-wing independent media people that have allegedly received money from a pro-Assad group, some under the guise of a journalism award, money that was awarded for winning a journalism prize. So I want to do this, and I'm going to give you the full breakdown of our revenue at the end of the segment, but let's go through this and actually try to do it right. So let's begin with, what are the allegations? The allegations are that several left-wing independent media hosts and writers and publications received money from a group called the Association for Investment in Popular Action Committees. It's a very sort of innocuous name, but investigative reporting by Charles David claims to demonstrate that this is actually an umbrella organization that is covering for and the sort of a name placeholder for groups that are pro-Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. The Association for Investment in Popular Action Committees has a trademark called the Syria Solidarity Movement, which again, it sounds pro-rights, but it's pro-Assad. And the idea here is that this is an umbrella group for pro-Syrian government organizations. When you look at them on GuideStar, it's very innocuous. It's a civil rights advocacy group organized in 2007. There's limited information. It's headed up by two guys, Paul Larudi and Kamal Obaid. And when I started looking into this, and this is all new to me, I did the research over the last 24 hours. Obaid has said that he was a member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is a 9/11 truther group. I would call it a conspiracy group. So it's starting to get a little bit weird. And the revelations that have come forward for independent media are that this group has created something called the Serena Shim Award for Uncompromised Integrity in Journalism, which awards money to different media people. They've paid former Ohio Democratic Governor Dennis Kucinich $20,000 to speak at a pro-Bashar al-Assad conference in the United Kingdom. And it so happened that Kucinich opted not to condemn Assad a few years ago. And it turns out that some people, including former TYT host Jimmy Dore, I don't know how the name is pronounced now, as well as YouTuber Kim Iverson, who I didn't know much about, and many others have received money from this group through this award. Now, let's go through it. There are some trends that exist here. Both Dore and Iverson have done a combination of questioning the known facts about Bashar al-Assad and have started to dabble in some conspiratorial false flag stuff as well. Both Dore and Iverson have put out content that is very pro-Tulsi Gabbard, and Tulsi has her own sort of history with Assad that has been the subject of scrutiny. There is an IRS filing, which you can easily find online, from the pro-Assad group, which shows that in 2017, Dore received $2,500 from this group, while Kim Iverson previously posted to Instagram that she received $5,000 from the group. So the first question is, can we trust the allegation? In other words, did these people and the others that are listed in the piece that we're linking to, did they receive this money? Iverson admits she got the money. She posted about it. And unless the IRS filings are false, Dore did as well. There's a longer list of people you can find online, but part one, did they get the money? It appears that they did. So then we have to ask, well, even if it's a pro-Assad group that is funding the award, are they getting money to say certain things, or are they merely being awarded for the things that they're already choosing to say? And I think that this is an important distinction. With a lot, we've talked about this before. You know, it's common that people at Fox News, people at RT, Russian television, they'll say, nobody ever comes in and tells me exactly what I need to say. And of course, it doesn't work that way. It's not say this stuff and then we will pay you. It is often that people are selected for roles on the basis of what they're already likely to say. So we really don't know the reality of this. That's one thing. Then there's this issue, it correlates with the pro-Tulsi stuff and alternative facts around Syria and related topics. This is odd, but ultimately it's their business. Now, if it were me, I would disclose this stuff. Full stop. I mean, I don't have any other way that I would qualify it. I would just disclose it. So then we come to me in the emails I've been getting over the last 14, 16 hours saying, David, you're part of this. Disclose your funding. We want to know where you get your money. So I'm going to do that. First of all, I don't know why anyone would think I'm getting money from a pro-Assad group or pro-Assad sources, particularly ones that are peddling in, where their leaders, this Obaid guy peddles in 9/11 truther stuff or anything. I don't do any of what they do. I don't do Assad apologetics. I don't do pro-Tulsi apologetics. I don't do any of this stuff. But I'll just come clean and tell you our funding. This is from a normal month. This is data from August. It's the beginning of October, so I haven't closed the books on September yet. But this is a typical month. This is August. We got 40% of our revenue from memberships, Patreon, and apparel, 32.5% from YouTube ads, 22% from ad sales, 3.5% from Twitch. As many of you know, we're new to Twitch, so that's a pretty small part of our revenue right now. Facebook ads, we're now monetizing on Facebook, but only about 1% of our revenue, and miscellaneous donations are 0.1%. Now, those miscellaneous donations, of course, could come from anybody, but what I'm talking about is sometimes people don't want a membership. They'll just send us, a check for a little bit of money. And that was 0.1% of our funding back in August. We don't take money from any groups. If we have an advertiser, it's marked as an advertisement. If we do a sponsored video, it's marked as a sponsored video. That's it. So I can't speak to the strategy behind other people's actions. I have no idea what people's financial situations are and what would cause them to accept or not accept money from an organization like this. Everybody's financial situations are different. And also, I don't know if what people are concerned about is that the content of these programs is influenced by the fact that they've received money from this group, or if people are concerned about the lack of disclosure or something else. And it would be interesting to clarify that. But to be very clear, people are often chosen for awards because they're saying the right things. And of course, the award can be a way to funnel money to someone under the guise of we are rewarding you for good reporting or whatever the case may be. But typically, that's not how it works. People are brought in or supported because they're already saying the things that the funder wants them to say. So that's our funding. I can't speak for anybody else, and I hope that this will sort of put to bed the questions I've been getting over the last half day or so. There's an interesting contrast of polling data today. Donald Trump's approval rating is 6 points lower than support for his impeachment, according to a new poll from Quinnipiac University. And according to this poll, Trump's approval is 41%, and support for his impeachment and removal, this is not support for the inquiry, this is support for Trump's impeachment and removal, is at 47% support. This is definitely what you would call polling underwater. And also notable is that the same poll from September 30th compared to this poll 5 days earlier saw a 30% increase in the number that want to impeach and remove Donald Trump. 5 days prior, support for impeachment and removal was 37%. 5 days later, support goes to 47%. That's an increase of 28-ish, somewhere between 25 and 30%. Now, it's important to understand the historical context here. 47% already believe that Donald Trump should be removed from office. That's not the number of people that are saying merely start the inquiry. And if you contrast this to Nixon in the 70s, impeachment support for Nixon was, I believe, in the 20s when the inquiry started, but very different circumstances. Nixon didn't have entire media outlets dedicated to propping him up the way that Donald Trump has propping him up. And once again, it is now getting real enough that the questions of wouldn't Pence be worse are starting to come up. And in many ways, he would. An evangelical Christian supremacist like Mike Pence would be much worse than Donald Trump in many ways. But I don't believe that that is a question that is going to actually become anything more than theory. Because once again, to either reset or as a reminder, This impeachment inquiry is not going to lead to the removal of Trump. I know every time I say this, a few people email me. They say, here's how it could, here's how it might. That's great. I don't think it's going to happen, but hopefully it will damage Trump's reelection chances such that he loses in 2020. We'll keep following the numbers as the process moves forward, but I want to hear from you. What do you make of these impeachment numbers? What do you make of the historical context around the impeachment support that there now is, not only for the inquiry, but for the removal of Donald Trump? I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. I look forward to hearing from you there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Ed Watson, and I'm very worried I'm going to mangle this one, Karka Bache or Karsa Bache. I really apologize. I think the odds that I got that right are very, very low. I also want to say thanks to today's longtime sustainer of the day, and that's Oliver Note, who has been a member dating almost 5 years back. Really appreciate everybody's support. Support independent media that you care about, support independent media that you like, that you think is important. And you can do that for our show by going to joinpakman.com. That's PAKMAN.com. It is time for Hatriot Mail. Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist does interpretive readings of the hate mail that I get. Quick reminder about Hatriot Mail.
Hey, let's face it. The only logical response to guns is more f***ing guns. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, this one combines race realism, anti-Semitism, and just regular old insults against me. Take a look.
You, a patronizing, propagandizing douchebag. Please stop making your awful videos. That is the only constructive criticism I can give you. Find a new job. Hell, find a job. It's clear you are a low IQ individual. More sad than anything, Jews are often high IQ, but it sounds like it missed you.
Very naturally, I have to say, there's a certain cleverness to it, very naturally working in race and IQ stuff into the Hatriot Mail while also insulting me. Fight Hatriotism by using the coupon code Hatriot40 when you sign up for a membership at joinpakman.com. The normal membership rates I find to be extraordinarily reasonable and a very good value. $6 a month or $60 for the year. If you want, subscribe using the coupon code Hatriot40. It'll drop the price 40%. Hatriots cry when you do it, and you still get 100% of the member benefits. It's great stuff. We wondered if it would happen, and it's starting to happen. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that State Department officials are going to be ignoring impeachment depositions for which they were scheduled to appear. Now, an important note, there's been some confusion about this. They were not subpoenaed. They were not yet subpoenaed, maybe would be the way to say it. Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani had documents subpoenaed. I told you about that yesterday. We don't know if he's going to comply. Pompeo is doing something different. These are requests to appear. And Pompeo, the Secretary of State, has directed State Department officials not to show up to these hearings as part of the Donald Trump impeachment inquiry. And this is sort of the first shot across the bow. They aren't yet ignoring subpoenas, but they are certainly saying, we're not going to comply easily. So this is an escalation, and the question is one of what happens next. The context here is that Secretary of State Pompeo is I want to say with every day, with every passing few hours, Pompeo is a bigger and bigger player in the entire Ukraine scandal. We learned in the last day or two that Pompeo was on the live call that Donald Trump had with the Ukrainian president. That is at the heart of everything that is going on right now, the whistleblower report, the impeachment inquiry, etc. So that pulls Pompeo in further. And he and William Barr at some point should have to testify about their involvement. Here's the situation, bigger picture as I see it. The walls are closing in on these people, all of them. They're flouting the rule of law. They've been doing it for years at this point in time. They are realizing, some of them without the help of attorneys and maybe some with the help of attorneys, that their best way out is simply not to participate. Now, why would they have that idea? Because ignoring subpoenas and not participating and not showing up and not talking to people so far has worked pretty damn well for the president of the United States and lots of the people around him. So ultimately, they are putting the onus back on us who are investigating them. Will they be forced into compliance by Democrats, or will they be allowed to ignore the legitimacy of co-equal branches of government? If you turn on right-wing radio or Fox News or whatever, you will hear the following storyline. Democrats are waging a coup to illegally remove Donald Trump from office. That's the story they are telling. It's a bogus story. The real coup that is being attempted is the usurping of checks and balances and co-equal branches of government by the Trump administration, breaking the law and then breaking it again to avoid facing the law. And now, if and until they issue subpoenas, and if and until those subpoenas are ignored, nobody can even be held in contempt because these are not yet subpoenas. And so far, there is no sign that they are going to show up when requested. We have Rudy's documents subpoenaed, but these State Department requests are just that. They are just requests to appear. And they need to now subpoena these people before they can even potentially hold them in contempt of Congress. But that will be a big moment if indeed it ever happens. History tells us, and what I mean is the last 2.5 years, the last 2.5 years of history tells us that they will ignore the subpoenas. The House subpoenaed William Barr for failing to provide that unredacted copy of the Mueller report. Barr ignored it, hasn't suffered any consequences. In fact, he's right in the middle of this entire Ukraine fiasco from which he should be recused. The House subpoenaed Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin for Donald Trump's taxes. It was ignored. There were no consequences. I could go on. The difference is that in an impeachment inquiry, it's possible that the enforcement of the subpoenas would be expedited in a court dispute. The downside is with every passing week, more and more of the people that are on the courts are judges and justices that have been appointed by Donald Trump himself. But when it gets down to it, when the rubber meets the road, Democrats are either going to have to hold someone accountable or not. And if not, this entire impeachment inquiry is pointless unless you actually enforce your powers. There's the sort of top level conversation has been, well, is impeachment going to serve to actually have the Senate convict Trump and remove him from office? I think that's the wrong conversation. I've told you from the beginning, I don't even think it's on the table that is possibly going to happen. The real question is, are you even going to get a proper, full, and a deep inquiry if everybody ignores your subpoenas for documents, if everybody ignores your requests to appear and potentially subpoenas to appear if we get to that point? What are we going to get out of it? We're going to get nothing. So I hope that Democrats have a strategy around this. I hope that someone is going to be ready to at least attempt to enforce their constitutional power. And remember, when I've been actually checking out some right-wing radio recently and right-wing TV just to see what they're saying, they are pulling this idea out of their hat, or it's coming out of the woodwork, that the inquiry is an attempt at a coup. Remember, these are co-equal branches of government. They are supposed to, based on what the framers wanted and the way our system was designed, they are supposed to comply with the supervisory and investigative capacity and duties of the House of Representatives. The coup would be flouting the law and then flouting all attempts that are legal and constitutional to explore what was done previously. I hope they don't allow it to happen, but some people get mad when I'm too pessimistic. We've not seen evidence that Democrats are going to actually enforce the co-equal branch of government status that they are supposed to have in these impeachment inquiries. I hope that they do. We'll see if anybody shows up. We'll see if Rudy's documents ever turn up. Make sure you are following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Lots of great stuff happening there. And while you're on your phone looking at Instagram, follow me as well at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Timothy Morton, who's an ecological philosopher at Rice University, also author of the book Being Ecological, out with Penguin and MIT. It's so great to have you on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. And if I couldn't do things like this, I couldn't think. You have to sort of work with other people to be able to do that if you're me.
Well, let's do it. I mean, I think maybe to start, let's define some terms a little bit. I think that maybe the term ecology and ecological is not often understood by many. There's sort of something in there that relates to the environment. There's something in there that relates to climate change, probably, or maybe not. So can we maybe start with defining what the field is and what we're talking about?
Well, the funny thing is that the word ecology is like the word economy, and we sort of know what economy means. Economy means like how you organize your house, actually. That first two syllables, the eco bit means house in Greek. You know, incoming, outgoing flows of money and whatever. And roughly it's sort of to do with how you organize your enjoyment, right? You know, like, I'll give you 50 cents and you give me this ice cream. It's a very cheap ice cream for some reason. Ecology is in a way the logic of that. It's the logic of where we live, how it works. And the funny thing is, of course, is that classical economic theory doesn't seem to have anything to do very much with coral or mountains or whatever. But I guess we're finding out right now just how connected these things are, that actually by ignoring some of the things like coral and mountains, we might have got some things a bit screwy with our economics, with our way of doing it.
So what would be some examples of maybe the questions that would be the questions that the field considers?
Oh, well, one very strong question would be, at what scales is this thing happening, right? Like, in a funny way, ecological awareness just means being aware that things are happening on more than one scale at once. Say, for example, you start your car. Now, that's actually, you know, on a planet scale, statistically meaningless. You haven't done anything. You shouldn't feel guilty in a way. I like to say that maybe there's a difference between guilty and responsible. Then billions and billions of those are doing something. So there's a funny paradox, which is that on one scale, nothing's happening. On another scale, everything is happening. And it's the same thing. You're doing the same thing.
So in the field of, you know, climate change and environmentalism, one debate that exists that I think is a better one than does it exist. I think that that's not a good debate at this point. But one is personal responsibility versus corporate responsibility. So the discussion of plastic straws and getting a car with slightly better gas mileage or whatever the case may be. And a counter to the entire framing of those questions is that this is not really about the decisions of the individual, because the overwhelming, I think it's, you know, 70% of emissions come from just 100 companies or something like that. So that the conversation is actually happening at the wrong scale. Within the ecological framework, as you say, you know, there's the little action and things are happening on multiple layers. Is there a particular level of zoom, so to speak, that is the predominant one in the questions you deal with?
Well, you're quite right to suggest, I feel, that the individual scale is a little bit too small, and it also brings up questions of good and evil. Like, am I doing this right? You know, what's the right shampoo to choose? I've got 200 shampoos in the shop and I'm confronted with them like this giant ice floe, only it's made of shampoo, and I have to figure out which one to do. And it's quite alien, you know. Of course, there's an awful feeling of powerlessness when you're thinking about something happening at planet scale. And I'm old enough to remember those things in the 90s where in the media, sometimes people would say things like, if we just did this one thing, like save toilet paper or jump up and down on the spot for a while, then this would happen. If we just did it for 2 weeks, then this other amazing thing would happen. And it's as if the onus is put on us as individuals. And I like to distinguish between guilty and responsible. I'm doing this interview across from Chevron and all those companies because I work at Rice University in Houston. And it's quite clear who's guilty in a way. Like, some people knew that global warming was happening and that and so forth quite a long time ago, rather like the cigarette situation. On the other hand, everyone's responsible, and it doesn't mean that even that you have to prove that you did it. All you have to prove is that you can understand it, right? Like, if you see somebody running in the street and they're going to get hit by a car, you're responsible for that person, and you don't have to prove even that you did it. And even maybe it might waste some time. You might be trying to prove that you did it with a calculator, and suddenly the person got hit anyway. So in a funny way, I feel like taking a lot of that guilt off of people's shoulders, and I feel like people like me often make ordinary people feel stupid and evil, and that's probably why our message isn't working so great.
What is it that when it comes to solving the problems that we're dealing with, you see as the biggest impediment? Because it's very easy, and I think at least partially accurate, to say that there are significant corporate interests that stand to lose a lot of money if we actually start dealing seriously with the problems that we're having. But that, I think, is only one piece of it. So are there others? There's this idea of analysis paralysis, of endlessly seeking facts without a path forward. I'll just open it. What else is preventing us from solving this?
The way that we talk to each other about it is quite inhibiting. I'm sometimes like to think that it's not exactly what you think that could start World War IV or whatever, but how you think, yeah? Like, there are different ideas, for example, about what the word believe means. Does believe mean hold on really, really tight to something and never let go? Or does believe mean something more like trusting, just sort of allowing things to be the case? And so, in a way, it's to do with what we think, all these deep things about what does believe mean, what does responsible mean, and in general, how do we act in groups? I mean, we on our daily lives, we're members of lots and lots of overlapping, intersecting, different sizes of group. And if we're going to work with this global warming stuff, it's a 7.5 billion group problem. And that's a big challenge, actually, to imagine ourselves as part of a group without thinking that the group is like this glass of water in which we just dissolve like salt or sugar, and we don't really mean anything. And we don't really exist. And it's a tremendously inhibiting to think, And again, perhaps it's a hangover from not so great aspects of some religion, that feeling like you're part of something bigger makes you feel like you don't count.
Yeah, in his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond talks quite a bit about the size of groups in which humans can function in different ways and to different degrees. And it seems that when we're talking about ecology, we really are talking about the planet. I mean, everybody is part of it in a sense, and that seems overwhelming to some degree. Is this the role? Is this why we have governments? I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic, and maybe you're not pessimistic, but how do we wrap our mind around how to solve a problem of that scope and size?
I have awful trouble with negative feelings about this. I feel badly a lot. It's one of my favorite hobbies is feeling badly. And I feel like if I'm just lying there in the fetal position, on the floor, which is how I feel sometimes when I hear this data, there's nothing I can do about it. So I have to figure out how to scrape myself off the floor and get up and do something. So one has to feel somewhat confident in the face of the awfulness. I think really that what we're dealing with is obviously, it's a problem to do with knowing that what you do at one scale might suck at another scale, right? Like very crudely, knowing that everything's sort of interconnected on the planet means that if you're going to be nice to bunny rabbits, it means that you're not going to be nice to bunny rabbit parasites. So part of it is this Groundhog Day situation. If you remember the film Groundhog Day, Bill Murray tries to get it right. He keeps going through the same day over and over again. And he realizes he can never, ever save the guy who's going to get hit. And that's a little bit like ecological awareness. There's always going to be some flaw in your plan. But that doesn't mean you should not try to carry it out. And so part of it is, realizing that we're always going to feel a little bit like hypocrites, and we're always going to wonder exactly why we're doing what we're doing. There aren't quite enough reasons all the time.
When it comes to action, I mean, do you think on those terms, is there, when we look at fossil fuels, trash, plastics, the oceans, the ozone, all of these different things, is there even something that you would say should be the areas of focus at this point?
Oh, well, actually, it's very easy for an individual person to realize that actually the best thing you can do as an individual is to eat a little bit less meat. If you're wondering what to do right now, and you're feeling overwhelmed by all of this, and the way we talk to each other about it is so triggering and sort of PTSD, and you open the paper and it says, 500, 16%, 20,000 years. And it's all so confusing. And then there's another lot of data dumped on you the next day, and then you read the editorial section and it's like, oh, you're really evil, you're bad, And so no wonder people feel put off. But actually, there's something very simple you can do while we're waiting for people to do bigger things, which is eat a little bit less meat. It's amazing how much fossil fuel emissions there are in agriculture. And if you want to do something right now, I would seriously advise that. As you've got a car, and if you do, and it's probably quite expensive to pay it off, maybe it's better just to focus on the food right now and not worry so much about the car aspect.
That's interesting, and that's something I try to do and I advocate for. And yet, if I recall correctly, I think agricultural emissions are something like 13% of total emissions. So we sort of are back in this position of, even if we all did it, we're dealing with maybe a tenth of the problem. And is that maybe what gets some people to do nothing instead?
I think so, yes. There's a feeling of paralysis. And, I guess one of the most important things in the short term is to remember to vote. Figure out who can represent you, who can work some things out politically in larger groups. It's probably more effective than anything, I think, right now, even though some things may seem more seemingly direct and sort of more obvious or flamboyant. For regular folks, I think just figuring out who's the right person to vote for with all of this is probably the best tactic right now.
In thinking a little more broadly, like maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, are individual conversations where you try to convince someone who simply doesn't believe that we are affecting the climate and our planet, is that a worthwhile conversation to have? Or are those sort of vestigial remains, so to speak, that will eventually go away and that's not really where our focus should be, arguing with people about whether it's real?
Gosh, that's interesting. Well, the funny thing is that, the wondering whether it's real or not is in a funny way a symptom of the fact that it's real. I don't know if you've ever been in a car accident, but when you're in something like that, some kind of traumatic situation, the thought is, gosh, is this really happening? And all around the world, people are going, is this actually for real, this global warming, mass extinction thing? And that's actually a signal that it is happening in a funny way. Another thing to say about this is that that kind of conversation where you try to convince someone, probably that kind of conversation has hoovered up as many people as it possibly can now who want to believe this stuff. I think it's probably more effective to have other kinds of conversation that don't necessarily aren't so direct. Like, for example, have a conversation about responsibility. Again, maybe jellyfish did this, but because I can understand it, I'm responsible for it, right? And because I've got fingers that can switch off the keyboard switches that switch off the oil pipes, I need to do this because dolphins can't do it because their flippers can't work the keyboards.
That's it. So the idea in thinking pragmatically then is that although there's nothing wrong necessarily with trying to convince people, but that has been going on for so long that the convincible people likely already have been. Am I sort of understanding what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I feel like, I was in the local burger place. I live in Texas, and so Whataburger is our Texas burger place. We're all very proud of it. And I had just seen an incredible retired ballet dancer do this incredible performance of this Debussy ballet in Paris. And then the person who served me the sauces, because someone comes with a tray with the sauces at this place, came to the table to serve this. I thought, gosh, you are handling yourself as gracefully as this ballet dancer person in Paris. And, people like me make people like you feel stupid and evil most of the time. No wonder we haven't started fixing this thing. Obviously, there's other things to blame, but who can I blame but myself if the situation isn't going so great? Any situation, right?
I don't know if you've seen the Democratic presidential debates that have taken place so far, but if you have, I'd be curious to know, what is your assessment of the way in which these issues are discussed, whether it's climate, fossil fuels, energy, whatever? I mean, in terms of the questions that are asked is sort of part A, and in terms of the framing of the answers as well.
Gosh, that's very, very deep. And it's very, very important because, again, I feel like how you do a thing is the thing in a way. It's not an optional extra. How we ask ourselves questions about this and how we talk about it And it seems to me that the way it's talked about quite often is, perhaps some of the solutions are right, but the language is very technocratic and it's not very democratically empowering, and it's not scaled so that you don't think like, what can I do as someone in my neighborhood, right? Like, what can I do as someone who lives in a street or lives in a town? Of course, there needs to be trans-state international action on all of this stuff. And yet, and at the same time, I think the way we talk about it makes it seem like this very scary alien thing. And it is scary, but it better not be alien, because if it's alien, then it's just something that happens, like fate or destiny or nature or whatever, the old word nature, the idea that things just sort of happen without your will, And this is something that we have to input our will into. So the way we talk about it is a little bit stifling, I feel. That's a very good question.
What would be an example of a question that you would like to hear from moderators posed to the candidates that would maybe be more encompassing or framed in a better way?
How do you think neighborhoods and local communities can organize to affect ecological political change? Would be my number one question. Just to get people in the mindset of thinking, this is a thing we can do, like we all live in a neighborhood. And in a funny way, the neighborhood is sort of a very good unit of political change. It's not individuals, it's a group, but it's small enough and it's connected enough to your actual physical location and who you are and who you know, that it's got this reality to it.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm imagining it being asked, and I just know that the candidates, at least that we currently have, would, if you're lucky, give an answer that is even tangentially related. I mean, that's one of the things where one of the critiques I've had of the debates is that the format doesn't really allow for depth. But the other issue is that on a lot of these issues, the candidates don't really know more than 2 or 3 talking points related to the issue. And that just seems like more of this is not an area of expertise really for any of the candidates, I think, unless you think there's someone who is better on this issue.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously someone like Bernie Sanders has got the right idea of the scale of funding involved to make this problem go away. But again, it's sort of about owning this as an issue. When you read the paper, it's almost as if we are continually surprised, for example, that hurricanes affect poor people and black people, for example, worse than white people or well-off people. And you sort of think to yourself, gosh, what else in social space do we treat like this? It's as if the hurricane is coming way from the outside of our knowledge. And it's like, shock horror, bad thing affects poor suffering people worse. And it's like, well, what doesn't do that? We should be owning this right now and sort of figuring out how to become more familiar with it. Otherwise, it's just this huge daunting mountain of data that we're looking at like freaked out romantic poets or something.
Yeah, I mean, your book, Being Ecological, is not about beating people over the head with facts, but how would you sort of summarize the effect you would hope the book would have on someone who reads it?
Well, I got asked by Penguin to write this book, and I thought, gosh, Penguin, you've given me a golden microphone to talk to people, and I'm a scholar. I don't get out much. I don't get to talk to people. So it's like, how can I use this opportunity right? And, people like me say, we have this horrible phrase, what is it? Appeal to a wider audience. That's so condescending, I personally think that making a nice thing for lots of people to read is upper level in a way from being right in that heavy duty medieval way that happens in universities. I'm making a kind of rubber stamping motion with my hand because that's how it sort of works. Whereas, being interesting, there's a philosopher called Heraclitus. He's an ancient Greek philosopher. And he says something very beautiful I love very much. He says, the truth can't be directly stated. You have to evoke it, right? And all this direct stating and pointing and this is bad and you're a bad person, it's just not. I mean, I'm quite a defiant person. So if I hear this kind of thing coming to myself, I tend to resist it pretty strongly. So my sense of the project is just basically trying to very gently evoke things, which ends up becoming more powerful, actually, than yelling. There's a very good phrase I heard once about the novelist Marcel Proust by one of my favorite philosophers, actually, a guy called Theodor Adorno, a German philosopher. And he says something very beautiful, which you could also think about Jane Austen if you've never read Proust. He says that Proust destroys the aristocracy with remorseless gentleness. That's the phrase that he uses. And I like this idea of gentleness can be more effective than aggression. You think about the nonviolent direct action, things that have happened, Martin Luther King and so on, and you sort of see the point of that.
I'm going to phrase this last question in what maybe is not ripe for an academic answer, but if 0 is total pessimism and 10 is total optimism about figuring this out before we destroy ourselves, where are you?
Well, 2.5 cheers for ambiguity, because on the one hand, as far as understanding this issue goes, I'm at a 1 or a 0, pessimism of the intellect, as they say. As far as feeling like we've got this, actually, if we can do this, it just takes a little tiny adjustment to get into doing this. I'm at a 9 or a 10, actually. So it's very ambiguous for me. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. That's my slogan.
So the answer is, depending on where are you from 0 to 10, the answer is it depends from where you are measuring in some sense.
Yeah. It's either 0 or 10. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. That's what I say.
We've been speaking with Timothy Morton, who's an ecological philosopher at Rice University. The book is Being Ecological. Timothy, so great having you on today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Bernie Sanders has absolutely destroyed third quarter campaign fundraising. The third quarter just ended at the end of September, and it ended as Bernie Sanders' most successful fundraising period of his entire 2020 campaign. So let's back up. As you probably know or would suspect, I hate how politics is funded here in the United States. The system is broken. The game is broken. It's a corrupt game. It's a game with rules that don't make any sense. Fundraising, super PACs, dark money, Citizens United, money is speech. I mean, it's really horrifying what is going on. But right now, this is the system that we have. And the way you win elections is by raising a whole bunch of money. So it still matters. And it can be a sign in the system that we have of enthusiasm for candidates. It can be a sort of proxy indicator, so to speak. And Bernie Sanders raised $25 million in the third quarter of this year. So in terms of polling, Bernie Sanders has not had a good third quarter. The momentum has been behind Elizabeth Warren in the polling, as I've said, much to the disgust of many people in my audience, but I will always tell it to you like it is. But that's polling. In fundraising, Bernie Sanders is more than excelling, now reporting more than 1 million individual donors to his campaign. That's a metric he achieved faster than any Democratic presidential candidate ever. And there's some very interesting data that's been released by the Sanders campaign. The most common profession among Bernie's donors is teachers. The most common employers among Bernie's donors are Walmart, Amazon, and Starbucks, which, I mean, what you have to understand is they are some of the largest employers in the country. So I wouldn't be surprised if more than one candidate can tout lots of donors from Walmart, Amazon, and Starbucks, but still interesting nonetheless. So we now have an interesting situation with the fourth Democratic presidential debate coming up in just over 2 weeks, actually 2 weeks to the day. We now have an interesting situation with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. There's the Joe Biden question as the centrist establishment candidate. And then there is the Bernie Warren, we are the most progressive candidates who have a shot at this thing, sort of status quo that we're dealing with. On the one hand, Bernie's fundraising is absolutely unmatched. The numbers tell us this. On the other hand, Elizabeth Warren continues to build momentum in the polls. So what could potentially cause things to break one way or the other? One thing we do need to talk about is media coverage. I just saw a report, although I did not fact check it, but it alleges that ABC News devoted only 7 minutes so far, period, in all of their evening newscasts to Bernie Sanders' campaign, which seems absolutely and totally bonkers. This is not, again, this is not me shilling for one candidate or the other. It's just pointing out that given the level of support Bernie does have, which has been sort of going back and forth between being in second and third place, 7 minutes of coverage seems quite low. We should fact check that. So media coverage is going to be a big thing. Another one is debates. But the caveat about debates is that debates don't seem to have had the effect on Bernie's polling that maybe we would have imagined. Bernie Sanders, I was looking back at the polling today. I've not identified any significant or notable jumps that Bernie Sanders had after debates. We've seen drops for Joe Biden. It seems that the debates have not been particularly good for Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren has been steadily gaining since the start of the debates and even before that. Most everybody else has been relatively unaffected. There's, one Emerson poll that has Andrew Yang at 8%. Whether we can trust that one poll with that high number and whether it's related to the debates, these are open questions. But for Bernie, it does not seem to have done much one way or the other. So we'll see what happens as far as the debates go. It's terrible, to go back to the real core of the issue here. It's terrible that the name of the game is raising money. It's terrible that this is how politics is done. It's terrible that congressional terms are 2 years. And when you combine that with the system of fundraising that we have, as soon as you're elected, you have 4 to 5 months, and then you've got to start raising money and campaigning for your reelection if you plan to do that. So it's a terrible game that has to be played. For as long as it is the game that is being played, you want to see the more progressive candidates raise the most money, and Bernie Sanders has raised a ton of it in the third quarter of 2019. We'll continue to follow fundraising numbers. We've talked before about the problem that we have in political discourse. When one side doesn't accept facts, it is a real impediment to being able to make progress and have good faith debate about any issue that we find important. And we're seeing that now front and center with the Ukraine fiasco, where only 40% of Republicans believe that Donald Trump spoke to the Ukrainian president about Joe Biden on the phone. Remember, Donald Trump has admitted to this. That bogus transcript, which was actually a memo, sort of a truncated summary of the call, includes a discussion of Joe Biden between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president. So let's take a step back and think about opinion versus fact. If you poll people about something like their opinion on gay marriage, it is far more reasonable that you would have very different perspectives from Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Now, for me, I think that the opinion on gay marriage, there's only one right opinion on gay marriage. But okay, this is a matter of opinion, and you would expect more difference in people's opinion on gay marriage. But when Monmouth University Polling Institute asked people, do you believe that Donald Trump spoke about Joe Biden on that phone call with the Ukrainian president? Almost all Democrats believed that that is something that was discussed. About 60% of independents believed that it was something that was discussed, but only 40% of Republicans believed it. Donald Trump admitted that they discussed this on the call. Not only did Trump admit it when asked, but the truncated transcript or memo that the White House released also includes the mention of Biden. So what do we do? What do we do when one side won't even accept inconvenient but verified facts that their own leader gives to them? Now, of course, there's the separate question of whether Donald Trump extorted or tried to extort Ukraine. And there's lots of other questions. But Trump admitted that they spoke about Biden, and 60% of Republicans either don't believe it or don't know. Now, there are some possible questions about this poll. It was conducted during a period mostly after the transcript or memo was released. But there was one polling day in there that was before it was released. Some people may just not have seen the news about that yet. But the trend is very clear. If they don't like the facts, they pretend they don't exist. And this makes it difficult or even impossible to advance serious conversations about what has to be done. It's similar with climate change, where there are real serious conversations about what policies should we have, what degree of government involvement should there be in climate change and dealing with that? What about personal responsibility when dealing with climate change? Whatever question you want to talk about, we can't even get on the same page about what the facts are because some large portion of the American right wing just refuses to accept the facts on climate change. We can't possibly fix anything or even discuss it in good faith if one side doesn't accept the facts. And sadly, this is how I end up back at we need to get around them to win. We can't try to win with them. A conversation about how to proceed with Trump or about the economy or about who to vote for in 2020 or about tariffs, These conversations are pointless as ways to engage with people about making change in 2020 if they won't even accept basic facts, including ones that their dear leader gives them. The short answer is you can't and you shouldn't. And we don't need to is the upside. I don't want to be a broken record again, but half the country doesn't vote, meaning you don't have to go out and find people and convince them that voting for Trump is a bad idea. That's not necessary to win this. You just need to find people who are already on our side and just explain to them the importance of voting. And that is much easier to do. It's still not easy. I've met people who don't vote, and it's not easy to convince them that they should be voting, but it is easier than convincing someone who won't even believe Trump when Trump says, we talked about Joe Biden on the Ukrainian president phone call, and I don't even think that we should bother doing it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a funny idea that someone has, which there's actually more to it. Let me explain after we listen.
Hey, David. I was just wondering if you've ever thought about acting. I can't be the only viewer who would be interested in a sitcom starring you and Jimmy from Philly. All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
Yeah. So listen, we actually got, after the last phone call I took from Jimmy from Philly, which is up on YouTube, it was put up there over the weekend if you've missed it. Jimmy from Philly is this very angry Trumpist who calls in, and we actually do sort of get along. After my last phone call with him, a lot of people wrote in and said, David, wouldn't it be hilarious if Jimmy called in and like presented a news story? If you said, Jimmy, I want you to present to my audience some legislative thing that happened, some news story, whatever. It would be absolutely hilarious just to see what he would do with it. And this is yet another idea, a sitcom with Jimmy from Philly and me. I love it. I know a lot of people don't like Jimmy from Philly. Every time Jimmy from Philly is on, I also get a lot of emails that say, David, stop giving this guy airtime. If there's one thing that I can say about Jimmy from Philly, other than I don't have a problem getting along with him in conversation, he is an absolutely furious Trumpist who hates everything that is Democratic, left, whatever, liberal, whatever progressive you want to apply. But he's a paid member to the David Pakman Show, which is, I don't know what to make of it. He's a paid member and he has been for months, and he continues to support the show. So in any case, I don't anticipate any sitcoms with Jimmy from Philly, but just a little background on some of the reactions to him. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. 2 ways to get access to the bonus show. Become a member or become a patron. DavidPakman.com/membership or Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I will see you then or otherwise on tomorrow's show.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.